Great seeing you here. My name is Luc de Custer, founder of the Custer Academy. And in this video, we are going to continue our example on the calculation of an activity on the node schedule. But this time we'll be starting from 0. We will be using cardinal numbers. And the advantage is here that we can also have decimals when we do the calculations. The numbers that we will find are comparable with the activity on the arrow diagramming method or the PERT method. And what we see is that for some people, this type of calculation may be a little bit easier. Although there are some elements that we have to take into account because there are some differences between the method starting from 1 or starting from 0. Now, before we start, we know it, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. So let's have a look at the schedule which is the same schedule that we had with the same durations and precedences when we calculated the activity on the node starting from 1. It's also the same precedence diagram or the same precedence information that has been used when we calculated or when we drew the activity on the arrow diagram. What we're going to do now is we're going to start with the calculation here, and the first thing to do is to look at the formulas. We have to remember when we start, we have the method starting from 0. The formulas are a little bit different. When we want to calculate the early finish of an activity, we have to add the duration to the early start. We don't subtract the 1 anymore because we're using cardinal numbers. And when we look at the early start of the follow-up activity, we have to look at the early finish of the predecessor. Now, again, we have to see which predecessor has the highest early finish time to select for the early start. Now, when we start here, first thing to do is we start from 0. So activity A starts on the event 0. We're working with events again. Finishes on 2. B starts on 0 also. Finishes on 3. 0 plus 3 is 3. And C starts from 0 to 1. The next step is the early start of D, which is equal to the early finish of A, which is 2. 2 plus 4 is 6. And now we can also continue to G. G has 2 predecessors, but we have to take the predecessor with the highest early finish time, which is D, which is equal to 6. So now the early start of G is 6, and we find the early finish being equal to 8. We can continue with E. E has only one predecessor, B, so the early start of E is equal to the early finish of B, which is 3, and the early finish of E is the early start of E plus D, so we have 3 plus 3 is 6. For F, again, we have 2 predecessors, but we take the predecessor which has the highest early finish time, which is B, so the early start time for E is 3. 3 plus 3 gives us the early finish time, and we see that the project duration here is 8 periods. Now we can continue with the backward pass, and the backward pass, here we have the formulas a little bit different. We start from the late start of an activity, from the late finish, and we have to calculate the late start. So the late start is equal to the late finish minus D. And we look at the late finish of a predecessor is equal to the late start of the successor. We have the duration is 8, so the late finish for activity G, E, and F is 8. We continue with G. 8 minus 2 gives us 6. Then we have the early or the late finish of D is equal to the the late start of G, which is 6. 6 minus 4 is 2. Late finish of A is 2. And the late start of A is 0. We can now do the same for E. E as 8 minus 3 is 5 as late start. So the activity B, or for F we have the same, 8 minus 3 is 5. Now we can continue for B and C. We first have to look at F to see what the result for B would be, because B has two successors. We have to take the lowest late start of E and F. In this case, both are the same. So the late finish of B and C are equal to 5. So we have a late start for C equal to 4. And for B, we have a late finish equal to 5 and a late start equal to 2. Based on this information, we can calculate the slack. The slack is late finish minus early finish, is late start minus early start. For A, we find 0, D 0, G 0. B, we have a slack of 2. For E, we have a slack of 2. C has a slack of 4. And F has a slack of 2. Now this means when we're looking at the critical path, which is the last step that we have to do, is we have to identify the longest path, and the longest path is ADG with a duration of 8, which is the critical path. Again, be aware, don't go into the trap that you will expect the critical path being the path with slack equals 0 or the activities equal to 0, because in some cases this will be false. CP, critical path, is the longest path. ADG is clearly the longest path. We can calculate the duration of the other paths. For example, BG is 5, BE is 6, BF is also 6, and CF is 4. So we have the different paths. We find the longest path to be ADG, which is the critical path. Now we have to continue here, and one of the things I wanted to do is to compare the two methods. When we look at the graph, when we put it in a Gantt chart, everything should be looking the same. However, when we look at the start from 1 and the start from 0, you will see that there is 1 unit difference between the method starting from 1 or starting from 0. The finish times are the same, but the start times are different. So when you are doing a calculation, you have to be aware whether the result is given or when you start from 0 or 1. There is clearly a difference in the early start numbers, and it may be sometimes confusing. Normally, in the PMI methodology, in the PMI exams, the calculations start from 1. So that should be the rule, but it's never certain. There are books who start from 0, and it depends a little bit on the people who are dealing with it. I had some student who told me when I was explaining this that I was wrong, and because she was taught starting from 0, and the results are a little bit different, of course, although starting from 1 is basically the same. Just the difference between the two methods is that the early start times are different, and that's because we're using ordinal numbers or cardinal numbers. When we start from 0, we talk from events, while when we start from 1, we talk in periods, and that's the main difference. So that was it for this exercise. Now you understand how to calculate all the elements related to the project network diagram: the early start, early finish, late start, late finish, slack, identification of the critical path. And now you also understand the difference between starting from 1 or starting from 0. Both methods are equivalent, so normally they should lead to the same result, but it may be sometimes confusing, so be aware of this. That's it for this video. You know it. Please don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next videos. Bye bye.